Okay, so before we start
If you want, I can take it up here.
the specific subject of today's share, I want to just, Rabbi Goda asked me, what about a compost? Can you make a compost during the Shmitta year? Remember, we've already learned that food which has a Kedusha Shvir, you're not allowed to throw the waste away in a general garbage. You should wait until it decomposes and is not fit for food, I would say, not just for man, but also for animals or birds or whatever creatures usually eat that food. But what about making a compost? That in itself is decomposing it. So I would say, well, I'm going to make a distinction. If it's a private compost, your own compost, my opinion, I would say by all means, provided you're not going to use that compost during the 7th year, you're going to leave it rotting until the 8th year, but you mustn't use it in the 7th year because its purpose is to increase growth, not to save the plant from dying. And the general rule is that in Shmitta, you can only do those things which are, you could say, that is keeping the plant alive, but not things which the purpose of which is to increase the growth. So by all means, if it's your private one, yes. Now, what about a public one? I don't know nowadays where, but some places, we did it here, certainly in places abroad, they have a public compost garbage. In other words, they try to get people to separate garbage, glasses, tins, whatever, and there's compost. The problem with that, there's two problems. One is, I don't know, maybe they sell it. Well, you're not allowed to sell or trade Kedusha Shmitta. And even if they don't sell it, which I think they probably do, maybe the people who collect it are going to use it during the Shmitta year, which you're not allowed to do. So I would say private one, yes, public one, no. Okay, I hope that's clear. Now we come to today, I want to talk about something which on the face of it is not related at all to what we've been learning up to now, although we'll find a little connection. And that's called Shmitas Kasafim, the wiping out, we could say the wiping out of debts. The Torah says this. It says, and this is the matter of the Shmitta. Shmitta really means wiping out. The wiping out, Shemot, Kol Baal, Masha Yudo Asher Yisher Barel. Everyone that is a creditor, and someone owes him money, so the debt is wiped out. And he should not survey, should not yigos, he should not sue or claim from his neighbor, from his brother, because it's called Shmitta Hashem. You can claim money back from a non-Jew if you lent it to him, but not from a Jew. So now we have a rule. The Torah says that you are not allowed, I'm going to say the 7th year, to claim a debt back that another Jew owes you. And not only that, there are two laws. One is that the debt is wiped out, and secondly, you're not allowed to, that's a positive, and you wipe out the debt, that's really like a mitzvah aseh, a positive commandment. The lender wipes out the debt, and in addition, not only should he wipe out the debt, but if he doesn't wipe out the debt, he's not allowed to claim the money. If he claims the money, then he's over a law. That's a negative prohibition. Okay, and the third mitzvah, which is related to that, is, all right, you're not allowed, you wipe out the debt, and you're not allowed to claim it. So comes along, we'll talk about the details of the years, but let's say in general, someone comes along now, and he says, do me a favor, lend me, I need some money urgently, lend me $500. I'll give it back to you in a month's time. So you say, well, wait a minute. A month's time is the Shmitta year. And the Torah says the debt is wiped out. I'm not allowed to claim it back from you. Why should I lend you $500 now, knowing that which you should pay back in a month, knowing that you don't have to pay it back, and I can't claim it from you? So the third mitzvah is that I shouldn't say that. I shouldn't prevent, or the lender should not prevent himself from lending money because the debt is about to be wiped out. And that's a very difficult thing to do. And that will be the basis of what we're going to learn soon about the heter of possible. But first of all, we have to learn some specifics about this. It's a very interesting one. What on the face of it has that got to do with Shmitta, the seventh year? The seventh year is a positive commandment. We have to let the land rest, and the land will have the produce of the land we can eat. It has kedusha, etc., etc. We're not allowed to own it, and all these laws that we've been learning. So what that doesn't, on the face of it, have anything to do with the money. So the money may be just a separate, in a sense, it's a separate mitzvah, but it also applies to the seventh year. In other words, the Almighty says, in the way that we give the land a rest, we're going to give our bowers a rest too. Okay. Now we're going to learn some of the details of the mitzvahs. Everyone is chayav in this mitzvah, Jews, men, women, and we don't say, well, the women, it's what's called a mitzvah, aseh shazman grama, they don't have to do it because it's a fixed time. No, it's included in other laws, etc. There's ways they answer that. So everyone is chayav in relation to loans to Jews. But as I said, in relation to loans to non-Jews, it does not apply. It applies not only in Eretz Yisrael, which is where the Shmitta laws apply, but in loans made outside of Eretz Yisrael, because the general rule is that the mitzvahs that apply to Eretz Yisrael specifically are either those to do with the temple or the divine service, or those to do with the land. But this doesn't have to do with either of those things. It's a general specific mitzvah, and it applies both to people living here and to people in Chutz La'aretz. If you have people in Chutz La'aretz who have lent money to people living in Eretz Yisrael, and subject to what we're going to talk about, they have to know that that loan is wiped out, and they're not allowed to approach the person to pay it back. Now, right at this point, I will mention that the loan is wiped out and the person is not allowed to claim it back. So therefore, let's say Reuven lent Shimon 500 shekels to be paid back. He lent it now to be paid back in a month, 2 months' time. So comes that time, and now it doesn't matter if it was a written loan or if it's a verbal loan, same law. So comes along that time, and Reuven has to say to Shimon, you know, my debt is wiped out. He says in Hebrew, but the main thing, what he says is, my debt is wiped out. I can't claim it from you. So then Shimon says, well, listen, I don't want to take advantage of you. The Torah says it's wiped out, but it doesn't mean I can't pay you back. I want to pay you back. Forget about you can't claim it from me. I know you can't claim it from me, but I want to give it back to you. And the lender can say, well, if you want to give it back to me, by all means, you can give it back to me. So although the debt is wiped out in the sense that it is not claimable, and furthermore, the lender is not allowed to come to claim it, nevertheless, if the borrower, knowing that the debt is wiped out, wishes to pay it back, then he has the right to do so. And some people say that it's a bracha for the borrower to pay it back, because it's not like a free gift. The man lent him the money, but he didn't give him the money. If he gave him the money, it's another story. He lent him the money. All right, the Torah says you can't claim it, but nevertheless, it's a good thing, an honest thing. You don't want the guy to lose money, so you pay it back. There is another view. It's a substantial sum of money, which he lent to someone, and he wanted it to be waived. He didn't give it as a gift. He gave it as a loan, knowing that the next year would be the Shmitta year, it would be wiped out. And he wanted to have that mitzvah of performing the mitzvah of wiping out debts. It's a very interesting balance. But, okay. So now we have to now decide, I'll tell you in a few minutes, we're going to what kind of debts it applies to and what kind of debts it doesn't apply to. The first question is, as I said, it applies to debts which are in writing or they're verbal. And some people say, most people say, that it happens, that the Torah happens, it's called Apkiita de Malka, the king does it. It's not that the person, that not the lender says, okay, the Torah says, I wipe out the debt, I'll wipe out the debt. No, from the Shemayim, the Torah, the Almighty, the king says, no more debts of power. Interestingly enough, although it's called Shemitah's Ksafim, it's talking about money, it can apply to other things as well. If someone borrows a specific item, he has to give that specific item back. If he borrows a car before Shmitta, he can't keep the car in Shmitta saying that's wiped out. But if he borrows a sack of potatoes, and in the Shmitta year, he has to return a sack of potatoes, I'm not getting into ribbis or that, he has to return a sack of potatoes, but he doesn't have to return the same sack of potatoes. So then, since it's not like a loan of a specific item, it's a debt. It's a debt of a sack of potatoes, like a debt of money. And interestingly enough, that's wiped out. And the lender can't say, where's my potatoes? And he can't claim them. Okay. As I said, it applies not only in Eretz Yisrael, but it applies throughout the world. The question is, the Torah says that the debt is wiped out on the Shemitah year. But the Torah uses the term, it says, Mikates Sheva Shonim, at the end of 7 years. Mikates usually means at the end, from the end of 7 years. So unlike the Shemitah of produce, which is coming in a couple of weeks' time, the Shemitah, the debts are only wiped out at the end of the Shemitah year. So therefore, at the end of the Shemitah year, he doesn't owe the money anymore. However, there is a problem, according to some, Mefoshim the Rosh, a very important Osik, for example, says it begins at the beginning of the year. And generally, we would say that even though the debt may not be wiped out until the end of the 7th year, the lender is not allowed to claim it during the 7th year. So the 7th year is like an intermediate kind of a period. The debt is not wiped out, but according to some views, at least, you can't claim it. So we shall see in a short time that the remedy that we use to avoid the law of Shmitta, of money, sometimes people will do it both at the beginning and the end of the year. I'll come to that in a few minutes. Okay, so now there are certain properties to which it applies and certain properties to which it doesn't apply. First of all, let's say you want to borrow money, a borrower needs the money and he goes to a lender. The lender is like a mark, he's not taking the risk, but he doesn't want Shmitta to apply because otherwise all the people who need money will come round to him on the 6th year, whatever, and borrow money, 7th, and then they won't have to pay it back, and his gemach will be dried up very quickly. There are people who borrow money, and if they're told they don't have to pay it back, will not pay it. So now he says, all right, he says, you want to borrow these 500 shekels from me? I will do it on condition that the Shmitta year doesn't apply. There's no law of Shmitta applies to this debt. The halacha is that even if they write that down, the law of Shmitta does apply to the debt, and it's wiped out, and the lender can't claim the money. So now they go to a different lawyer. So the other lawyer says, no, you don't write that, you write this. We agree that notwithstanding the law of Shmitta, the borrower will repay the money to the lender. That is a valid clause. Again, if you write there's no law of Shmitta applicable to this debt, it's invalid. If you write the borrower agrees that the law of Shmitta will not apply to this debt, it's valid. What's the difference? The difference is the first case, you say there's no law of Shmitta. The law of Shmitta doesn't apply. You can't say that because the law of Shmitta is in the Torah, and that's called Matne Makashe Kosupator. You're not allowed to make a condition saying what the Torah provides, I don't want to keep. It's very important, we'll see in marriage. But you can't say, I'm not denying that there's a law of Shmitta. Of course there's a law of Shmitta. But I agree, the borrower says that I will not rely on it, and that I will pay you back even though there was a law of Shmitta. So that is permitted. Why? Because we have a rule, even though I'm not allowed to make a condition against the Torah, I can do what I like in a sense with my money, provided it's legal. So therefore, I'm not denying there's a law of Shmitta, but I'm saying it's my debt and I choose to pay it back. So that is permitted. Okay. This is very important. Clarification. Now, if nothing is said, of course, the law of Shmitta applies. To what debts does the law of Shmitta apply? To everything? Well, no. For example, we said it applies whether the loan was in writing or whether it was verbal. But let's say you go into a shop and you buy something, and the shopkeeper writes it down on his books. You have an account, he has to pay you next month, but next month will also be the Shmitta, or after the Shmitta, the 8th year. Does that debt become irrevocable? You bought something and it's written down, the terms are you'll pay it next month on a specific date. That's one possibility. What happens if you go to a professional, doctor, a lawyer, who does work for you, and he sends you a bill and you don't pay it? Now comes the Shmitta year. Can I say, oh, I'm not going to pay your bill? It's the Shmitta year already. It's your bad luck. Should have made sure you got your money in advance. Okay. So those are a couple of examples where we have to question and define what kind of debt the laws of Shmitta applies to. So let's start with just looking up because I want to get it down. First of all, let's say he lends the money for a specific period. Let's say on the 5th year, he lends the money for 10 years, okay? There's a substantial sum of money. It's buying a house, and the mother is a good man, I'll lend you 10,000 shekels. You'll pay it back to me after 10 years. So this is the 5th year, 6th year, 7th year, 8th year. The Rabbi says, well, look, my friend, the 8th year came and has gone, and the debt has been wiped out. I don't owe you any money at all. Be unfortunate because people wouldn't be able to borrow money so easily. Well, we'll deal with that in a moment. So now we say, if it was written for a specific period, and therefore it's not within the definition, or he's not allowed to claim the money back on the Shmitta year. Because he can't claim the money back on the Shmitta year. It's not due yet. It was borrowed on the 5th. It's got to be paid back on the 15th. It hasn't got to be paid back on the 7th or the 8th. So since the law that the lender is not allowed to claim the money doesn't apply to such a debt, because by definition he can't claim the money, because he can only claim the money in a few years' time. So therefore the law of Shmitta does not apply. The debt is not wiped out, and he can, when the time comes after 10 years, he can claim his money back. Let's say the lender took a pledge. If it was on property, took a mortgage on the property. If it was on, sometimes people who lent money used to take mortgages on their bike, or someone's buying a car, he puts a mortgage on the car, or anything. He's got a valuable paintings, he needs some money, so he borrows the money on a pledge. That's called a mashkon. So then the Shmitta year doesn't apply. It doesn't wipe out the loan. What happens if the loan is worth more than the mashkon? It's an interesting question. The loan is not wiped out because the object which is mortgaged or chattel mortgage or to the lender, really the lender's hand is on it in a sense. So all he's doing is taking what's his. Once you buy a house and the house is mortgaged, if you don't pay the money, then the house belongs to the bank. If you borrow money on the pictures and you don't pay the money back, so the pictures belong to the lender, so his hand is on it. So therefore you can't say that it's wiped out. It's an interesting question. If it's worth more, if the loan is worth more than the mashkon, the mortgage object. Let's say you think you got a picture, wow, it's a very valuable picture, Rembrandt or something, and you borrow a fortune of money, it turns out it's a forgery, it's not worth it. So can we say, all right, I can't stop you claiming the value of the mortgage, but all the rest of the money, that's just a regular loan. You can't claim it. It's an interesting question. Some say yes, some say no, because it shouldn't apply to this. Okay. So now, what about a very common example? You have an account at the Makovet, and he gives you a credit, right? And you pay him on the 10th of the month, the 15th of the month. So now that, well, two things. One is there's no fixed date, and one, there is a fixed date. If you didn't fix the date, so then he said, even though I didn't fix a date, it was understood that I wouldn't claim it from you straight away. When we needed the money, the time was up to pay, you would pay. But if he fixes a date and it says it's payable back on the 15th, so some will say that that's a debt. There's a whole question about shopkeepers. Some will say now it's not exactly a debt for the goods. You got the goods, and theoretically you were supposed to pay for it at the time, but he lent you the money not to pay for it, so that money that you owe him on the 15th is like a debt. It's like a debt of a loan, and therefore Shmitta wipes it out. some will say that if he makes consecutive, because every time he goes to the shop, he buys something, so there's a running bill, and then there's a running bill at the end. So again, some will say you have to be careful. You don't have to pay that because that's an accumulated debt. And some will say, no, it's not an accumulated debt. It's for the goods, and it was always understood that whenever the lender wanted it, he would have to pay it back. So therefore, that's an open question, and we'll deal with that now on the advice of what to do. The workers' wages you have to pay. You can't say to them, you didn't pay the worker on time. And then you say, I'm sorry, my friend, the work is wiped out, the debt is wiped out, but you want to work for me for another 7 years on the same conditions. We're happy for you to do so. Okay. Now we have one other exception, which will come to be the door to the general exception. There is an exception that if there is a debt which is recorded by a deed, let's say an IOU, so he says he wants 5,000 shekels, so it's very nice, but you have to sign an IOU. So he signs an IOU. It's payable back next year, which would be the Shmitta year, maybe, or probably the 8th. So the lender can take that deed, that IOU, to a beis din and hand it over to a beis din for collecting it, because the beis din is now collecting it for him. He's not collecting it himself. The beis din is collecting it, and the prohibition against collection only applies to the individual, not to the beis din. So this rule that we've made, that he can hand it over to the beis din, becomes the opening for the main heter, the main way that we overcome this, go around this law, which is called the posbol. The posbol, which we'll explain in a moment, is a halachic procedure by which persons who are owed money can collect it during the Shmitta year, whether it's for actual loans or shop debts or what you owe on the credit card or banks or all these things, principally for private debts. So that's called a posbol. We'll explain what it is and why it is in a moment. But that will be a way in which the Shmitta law can be avoided. Why should we look for a way in which the Shmitta law can be avoided? Well, the Torah doesn't want people to lose. That's why we can sell your chametz on Pesach. A certain hazard people, the Torah doesn't want people to lose money unnecessarily. So we are concerned from 2 points of view. If the law of Shmitta is enforced strictly, then the lenders will lose their money. That means a gemach will go up in air. That's not what it is intended for. It's intended to repeat giving loans to people. But it will have another consequence, which is that people won't lend money if there's any question that the Shmitta will come in. So certainly the year before the Shmitta, no one is going to lend money if it's going to be wiped out. Not no one. But generally speaking, the lender will not, because otherwise if he wants to give him the money, he'll give him the money. But why should he lend him the money knowing that it's going to be a gift? So the answer is that therefore we are worried that people who need money, borrowers, will not find a source for money. So therefore Hillel, the elder, great Rabbi Hillel, brought about a takana which enables the law to be avoided, principally in order that the normal commerce of lender and borrower should continue, because otherwise the lenders won't lend money and the borrowers won't find a place to borrow. So that's why he came up with what's called a takana, which is a legal procedure. I don't want to call it legal fiction, a legal device, but I don't like those words. I would rather call it a legal procedure. And the word posbol is an interesting word. First of all, you look at it, it's not a Hebrew word. Maybe it's like a Greek word because we borrow Greek, but it doesn't look like a Greek word either. Maybe. So it turns out that it is from a contraction of three Hebrew words. Really, it's prosboloti, and the first word, paros really means like a takana, a legal regulation. So pros means like a regulation or a legal procedure. Bole means for rich people, and bote means for poor people. In other words, I'm making a procedure whereby rich people can lend money to poor people, and that's called a pros. And what does that effectively do? It's like this. The lender, let's say a shopkeeper, he has a number of accounts owing. And there's a question whether Shmitta will write them out or not. The doctor, the lawyer, they owe him money. The more important as well, that someone who has a gemach job, so anyone lends money to someone else, and he doesn't want that debt to be wiped out. So Hillel took advantage of this rule that you can hand over an IOU, a legal document, to the Beis Din, and he now extends that so that the lenders write a deed to a Beis Din where they say, we now hereby transfer to you all our debts. Don't have to specify them. In writing, not in writing, where there's certain debts or possible debts. I transfer to you, the Beis Din, all my debts. So now they're not my debts anymore, they're your debts. And you collect them. But you collect them for me. And really, this is the sting. And what's more, you're collecting them for me, but you can appoint me as your agent to collect the debt. Let me say that outside again. Shimon owes Reuben money. So Reuben goes to a Beis Din and he says to the Beis Din, look, Shimon owes me money and I'm not allowed to collect it, but I'll transfer the debt to you. And you are allowed to collect it because it's only a personal debt that's wiped out, not the debt that's owed to a Beis Din. So now you, the Beis Din, can collect it from him. And that the Shmitta doesn't wipe out the debt because it's a debt between the Beis Din and him, and it allows you to collect it. Maybe you're not going to be bothered to collect it. Or you haven't got the facility to go around collecting all these debts. You don't even know who they are. I didn't specify all the debts. I just said anyone who owes me money. So now you, as the Beis Din, I believe this is how it works, come back and appoint me as your agent to collect the debt. So I collect the debt from Shimon. I come and say, look, you owe $100 shekels. So Shimon pays up. That money really belongs to the Beis Din because I was collecting for them. But the Beis Din, it really belongs to me because I just transferred it to the Beis Din on the condition that if they got any money, they give it back to me. So the money goes around in a circle and finishes up by me where it belongs. This is like a classic legal procedure to avoid the rigors of the law, but at the same time, since it was enacted by Hillel to deal with a real problem, the fact that it seems a bit funny because here I'm not allowed to collect the debt, but here I do collect the debt and I keep it. So what about the law? So the answer is that the Almighty in his wisdom in the halacha allows in proper cases legal ways of avoiding the full rigor of the law. As I say, a similar example in Pesach, I'm allowed to sell the Pesach, so it's no longer in my possession, and I don't have any obligation to get rid of it. And now at the end of Pesach, the boy didn't come up with the money to buy it, comes back to me. There were numbers of these kinds of things, and this is an example of such a thing. And it was instituted by Hillel, a very great, important rabbi, in order to avoid the situation that people wouldn't lend money. And now, so how is that done in practice? So we have a deed. I'm not going through all the deeds. The deeds are distributed by the Rabbanut or your local rabbi, or do a private one, but in general, they are printed out and given out through Beis-Dins and through the local Beis-Dins. And you would go as an individual to the Beis-Din who will fix the date and the day when they do it. Now, the problem is like this. Of another halachic problem. It's all very well and good that I say that I transfer all my debts to the Beis-Din. And how am I doing that? What is the legal process through which the transfer is made? When property is transferred from one person to another, that requires a legal action. If I want to buy something in the shop, it's not enough to say to the seller, I want that, and so it's okay, it's yours. You have to have some legal action. Question of paying the money. Normally we will say you have to pick up the item. Classic case was a shoe, but you pick up the item, it becomes yours, you've got to give them the money. What happens if you can't pick up the item? It's not here, so you can pick up a substitute, which you call a suza. That's what you pick up. People pick up the other person's yarmulke or something, or some kind of a symbol, but there has to be a symbolic, at least a symbolic lifting up of an object. To acquire an animal, there has to be a symbolic movement of the animal. Animals which are pulled, you have to pull. Animals which are driven, you have to drive them. The more talks about an elephant, you have to pull up an elephant. The pulleys. You have to make a symbolic acquisition, which requires a physical action. Well, now here the guy is handing, if there is one IOU, as we said before, so there's a deed. So then the lender can hand over that deed to the Beis-Din. And that's a legal acquisition. But if it's just generally all the people who owe me money, what is he handing over to the Beis-Din that the Beis-Din acquires all these debts and in turn can then collect it and refund the money? It's just theoretical. It needs a kinyan. A kinyan is an acquisition, as it were, a physical acquisition. So what we do is that we have a rule that land is acquired by a deed. Personal property, movables, are not acquired by deeds, they're acquired by physical acquisition. But land is acquired by a deed, and as we know, you sell something, the land, you write, I, the undersigned, so and so and so and so, here, sell to so and so and so. The land is ascribed to such and such signature, and that's a deed. So when the seller gives that to the buyer, that's an act of possession. So now if the lender, the man who goes to the Beis-Din, has some land, so he can give that land to the Beis-Din, and he can say to the Beis-Din, oh, by the way, in addition to the land I'm giving to you, I'm giving to you all my debts. Because we have a rule, land is a very important legal concept. So when someone transfers land, with it he can transfer all the movables. You sell a house, so you sell the house, and with it I sell all the furniture. Normally, if you just sold the furniture, you would have to go in and pick it all up, have some way of acquiring it. But since it's acquiring the land, with it he can acquire movables and other kinds of property without a physical act of acquisition on that other property, because that comes along as a parcel with the land. It's bound up with the land. So therefore, the seller has some land, then he can give the land to the Beis Din, and with it all my debts, doesn't have to specify them, they don't have to make an acquisition, they come wrapped up in the land. Then when the Beis Din give it back to him, they give him the land, and they also give him back all the debts at the same time. So that's all right if he has land. But if he doesn't have land, so what's he going to do? So then the Beis Din give him a bit of land. You only need a little bit of land, the minimum land. So someone in the Beis Din or someone has got land, they give him the land. Now he's got the land, he gives it to the Beis Din. Along with the land, he gives all the debts. The Beis Din give him back the land, and he gives him back the land to the person who gave it. How much land? What is the land? So this is, I said at the beginning, that there was a little connection between this and the main law of Shmitta we've been learning about produce. What's the connection? The connection is, well, what is this piece of land to see how big it is? So what happens if it's a piece of earth in a flower pot? Can the Beis Din give him earth in a flower pot? And that's the law. Someone else gives it to him. Well, he has some land. The only land he has is a bit of dirt in a flower pot. Can he use that to give the Beis Din as the oil, if you like, for the machinery of the first altar? He needs some land. What about earth in a flower? Well, that depends whether the flower pot has a hole in it. So in the law of Shmitta, we learn, am I allowed to plant a plant in Shmitta in a flower pot? Or can I harvest fruit, vegetables that have been growing in a pot with a hole in it? What's the law of a plant in a pot with a hole in it? So if it has a hole in it, we say it's like the land. So in the same way that it has Kedusha, if it was growing in the land, it'll have Kedusha in the pot. If it doesn't have a hole in it, it's made of a non-porous material, it's removed from the earth, so then it doesn't have the land of Shmitta. So lo and behold, the same rule will apply in opposite effect to this question of what land does the lender need in order to transfer his debts to the Beis Din. If he has a piece of land in a flower pot with a hole in it, so that's his land, he can use that to transfer his debts. But if he has a bit of earth in a flower pot without a hole in it, so that's not considered land, he can't use that to transfer his debts. So there's a little connection between the two. But the law of Shmitta is very important. So when do we do it? So generally speaking, we should do it twice. We should do it at the beginning of the year coming up. That's to say, in the next couple of weeks, the local rabbi will organize a Beis Din just before Rosh Hashanah, and people will go along, sign the papers, and transfer the debts to the Beis Din. But if the debts occur during the Shemitah year, so that doesn't help. And also, according to the law, which says you've got to do it at the end of the Shemitah year, you have to do it twice. You'll do it at the beginning of this year, and you'll do it at the end of this year. And the end of the Shemitah year is the more important one, because according to most Jews, that's when the debt is wiped out. So you should do it at the beginning. If you can't do it in the beginning, in any event, whether you do it in the beginning or not, you should do it at the end. Okay, I hope that's clear. And if anyone has any questions, they'll let me know and we'll try to answer them next week.
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
Phone 2, thank you.
Got it, Green.
Good.
The minute you got it all. You got it
Not bad.
down pat.
During Nevuah, you're getting at a whole different level.
You should go over his house tonight when he's sleeping and tell him all over.
There's a lot to it. The principle, there's a lot of
What?
details to it.